Good morning, everyone. Aloha, and thank you for coming to our Jizo Bodhisattva service. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce to you someone who's come from a very long distance to be here with us and practice us with Daifukuji for about 2 weeks, I think. I'd like to introduce Paula Chiplis. She practices with the Soto Zen Center, I think, in Washington, D.C., but she has roots here in Hawaii, and she's come a long way and will be joining our Sangha in our various practices. So we're aloha and welcome, Paula, as well as to everyone else. Aloha and welcome. My relationship to the Bodhisattva Jizo, in Japanese we say Jizo-sama, began in my childhood. And because when I was little, and I've mentioned this before, I would attend with my parents the annual Jizo Matsuri, it means Jizo Festival, which was held here at the temple for many, many decades. And it would be held here in the evening outside in front of the Jizo-do. The Jizo structure is a little Jizo, red and white Jizo shrine outside. So I grew up with this Bodhisattva Jizo. And then, during the pandemic, when everything was quiet here, and I didn't see too many people around, but there were so many people who were sick and dying, and so many affected around the world by the COVID virus. And I saw in front of me so many manifestations of this Bodhisattva Jizo. The doctors, the nurses, the hospital staff, the first responders, so many risking their lives, oftentimes in what we might consider hellish conditions. This was such an unknown, mysterious thing at the beginning, but risking their lives to save others, help others. So it was during the pandemic I realized that it would be nice to have a Jizo Matsuri, but a special Jizo service on a Sunday to pay homage to the many manifestations of this Bodhisattva when the pandemic ended. So, but after I made that decision, the very next day we had our Friday group came for Samu, our weekly temple cleaning, and a member of our temple pointed out to me, she said, Sensei, come and look. There's this image of Jizo that has appeared on the sidewalk out there next to the Jizo shrine. And so I shared this story last year, but some of you may not have heard about it. But I went to look, and indeed, there was an image of Jizo right on the sidewalk. So beautiful. A Jizo Bodhisattva with a shaven head, hands in gasho, and 2 children in his sleeves of compassion. So I took a picture of it, and it's inside the Jizo shrine. So after the service, we'll invite everybody to go outside on your way to the social hall to offer some incense to the Bodhisattva Jizo, and then you can take a look at that picture. So who is this Bodhisattva Jizo, and what is a Bodhisattva? So, Jizo-sama, Jizo has many names. In Japanese we say Jizo-sama or Jizo Bosatsu, Bosatsu meaning Bodhisattva. So at Daifukuji we have represented in our temple 3 different Bodhisattva. Kanno-sama, the Bodhisattva, great compassion. We have a room, our meditation hall to the side, filled with images of Kanno-sama or Kuan Yin. Many, many images of this Bodhisattva of compassion. We have Jizo-sama. Today's service is dedicated to Jizo-sama, and we have a Jizo altar. After this, we'll invite everybody to come forward in the chanting of a Jizo mantra, and you'll be able to offer a flower to the Jizo-sama here. We have Jizo-sama outside. We have Jizo-sama, image of Jizo-sama in our columbarium. Right in back of the temple, there's a large building, and in the columbarium, the Nokotsudo, there is a beautiful statue of Jizo-sama. So what is a bodhisattva? Oh, and there's one more. Manjushri, Monju Bosatsu. We now have Monju Bosatsu image in our meditation hall. In Soto Zen meditation halls, you'll find this Bodhisattva Manjushri, and later you can go and look at the image of Monju Bosatsu. So what is a Bodhisattva? There are various meanings or definitions of a Bodhisattva. But I think of a Bodhisattva as an enlightened being who postpones entry into nirvana until all beings are liberated from their suffering. So not just some beings or a lot of beings, but all beings without exception. So Jizo-sama made a great vow, as bodhisattvas do. And Jizo-sama's great vow is that only after all the hell realms are empty will I become Buddha. Only after every single suffering being is liberated will I become Buddha. Until then, Jizo-sama's work is not done. And this could take a long, long time. But bodhisattvas are in there for the long run. Lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of practice and selfless serving. So Jizo Bodhisattva has many roles. We know of Jizo as being a special guardian of women. Throughout the ages, women have suffered greatly. Injustice and all kinds of suffering, so especially women and travelers and fishermen and children and animals, tenderly caring for the spirits of those who died at a very young age in their lives, sometimes even before being born into the world. So Jizo is typically depicted as a monk with shaven head, but bodhisattvas in general appear in this world in a variety of forms, sometimes male, sometimes female, and sometimes with the attributes of both male and female, because all bodhisattvas are beyond gender. In Japan, Jizo is this greatly loved bodhisattva, so dear to the people. Jizo is so accessible and close to the people's hearts. You'll find images of Jizo everywhere in Japan. In rice fields, along roads, in little towns, inside temples. And the villagers, as part of their daily lives, would offer offerings to this bodhisattva. A fruit, a stick of incense. You find Jizo Bodhisattva in cemeteries as well. So our Jizo-sama, the one out in front, is a very special Jizo Bodhisattva, like they all are. And it was our own Verna Chang here who brought me a book the other day. It's actually a book that we have in our library. And it's called Guardian of the Sea, Jizo in Hawaii, by the author John R.K. Clark. And he talks, Jizo is regarded too as protector of those who swim and fish. So oftentimes you might find a Jizo at the beach, and the Japanese immigrants who came to Hawaii, put up these stone Jizos at various beaches throughout Hawaii. And if you look in this book, Jizo Guardian of the Sea, it tells you where all of these Jizo-sama can be found. So our statue was donated in 1961 by Mr. and Mrs. Suehiko Ota. They were the parents of Mrs. Matsuura, wife of Reverend Yokue Matsuura, who was the 6th minister of Daifukuji. So some of you who've been here a long time remember Reverend Matsuura and Mrs. Matsuura. So the statue is a gift from Mrs. Matsuura's parents. And according to this book, this is something I did not know. It says that this statue is an Enmei Koyasu Jizo. And it said that a long time ago there was a sign there that said Enmei Koyasu Jizo. And it's the Jizo for prolonging life, as well as a Jizo for safe childbirth. So, you know, Ojizo-sama is one who cares for and protects those who are most vulnerable in our world. And of course, this includes all the little ones, babies and infants, the children of all ages, whose passing brings just unimaginable pain and grief to their parents and families. So we know what a devastating loss the death of a child can be to those who love them. So today's service, like Jizo's services in the past, is dedicated to children, babies, our sons and daughters, those who left us, died young. This year, I also offered our Sangha the opportunity to remember their precious pets. So Jizo Bodhisattva enfolds babies, children, and animals alike in his robes of sheer compassion. I want to point out that Jizo Bodhisattva, although usually depicted as a monk, can be male or female. So decades ago, when my husband Mike, Amy, and I lived in Berkeley, California, I found this part-time job with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Kensington. It was a small job, but it was something that I could do while taking care of my daughter Amy, who was about 3 years old at the time. And this job entailed visiting and spending time with an elderly member of this Unitarian Universalist Church. And what happened was that this elderly woman had fainted while attending a church service, Sunday service, and this led the minister and others in the congregation to believe that she was malnourished, that she wasn't getting enough food and care. So they hired me to visit her and provide companionship for her, and also to kind of go in and see what her living conditions were like. The church members weren't always allowed in. She was cared for by a niece, and it was difficult sometimes going to visit this woman named Marian. So I went in and I spent time with Marian. She was very thin and frail. She was a retired kindergarten teacher who just loved children and animals. And she volunteered. She spent her time volunteering for the organization called UNICEF. So it really concerned me to see that her living conditions were not good. She actually lived in an old and very beautiful home in a beautiful part outside Berkeley, of town outside Berkeley. But her home was very run down, and the living conditions were not good. But on one of my visits, I found Marian in bed, and she had the bed sheets really pulled up high, and there was this really terrible smell that filled the room, and she was just holding something underneath the sheets. So I said, "Oh, Marian, you know, what do you have? What are you holding underneath the sheets? Would you please show it to me?" I said, "You know, there's this smell in this room." And she kind of just hung on like So I said, as gently as I could, I will help you, Marian. Can you please show me, what are you holding underneath these sheets? So with a very pained expression, and she had tears in her eyes, she kind of, her whole, she was like a skeleton. Her fingers were very thin, and she put down the sheets. And I looked, and I felt, I kind of gasped, because she was holding a kitten, a dead kitten, which was already partially decomposed. And this kitten was one of Marian's greatly loved children. She loved her cats. There are cats around, and she loved her cats so much. And she just tightly clung on. She wouldn't let go of what remained of one of her precious children, the kitten. So I said to Marian, Marian, we have to call your minister, Dr. Boki, the Reverend Dr. Boki, okay? And he's going to come and he's going to help. And she said, okay. So I called Reverend Dr. Boki, her minister, and luckily he picked up the phone and he said, I'll be right over. Just stay right there. I'm coming. So he came over and he reassured Marian that we would give this kitten the proper burial and offer a service, and that we would bury the kitten in a grave right beneath her window where she could look out and see the kitten's grave by the rose bush. So we did a ceremony for the kitten, and I stayed with her while Reverend Boki buried the kitten as promised, and we all spent some time together, made sure Marian was clean and fed, and then Reverend Boki gave me a ride home. And I remember two of us, we just sat in silence. We didn't have anything to say. We just felt so sad. Our hearts were broken, just like Marian's. But to this day, I've never forgotten Marian, and I've never forgotten Reverend Boki's Jizo-like compassion. A compassion which he extended to both Marian and her beloved kitten. He didn't say, Marian, it's just a kitten. He really understood that this was Marian's baby. He understood how lonely a life she led and how much he just loved this little kitten. So fast forward many years, one rainy day, this was a number of years ago before the pandemic, I received a call. Maybe it was during the pandemic, I think so. I received a call from a lady in our community. And she just called and she said, she was crying and she said, Reverend, my pet bird just died. And I don't have any place to bury her because I live in an apartment for seniors down in Kailua. So, may I take my child, she said, to the temple? And will you help me bury her? Will you allow me to bury the bird in the temple garden? So I told her yes, she could come over. And, it was a pouring rain. And she emerged from her car and she had her precious dead bird in this beautiful box, just sobbing. And I met her, had a shovel. I was ready, so I met her at her car. And I said, well, look around and I want you to tell me where you think you'd like to have your baby bird buried. So she kind of looked around. I told her, we can't dig too deep here because so much lava rock, but we'll do our best. And she said, it would be nice to bury my bird beneath a tree. So I said, well, we have our Bodhi tree here at Daifukuji. Shall we bury your baby bird under the tree of enlightenment. So she thought that was a good idea. And so that's where we laid her little bird to rest. And it was just pouring. We were soaking wet and trying to dig a hole. And, you can't dig too deep. So the box was kind of big, but somehow we were able to dig a hole, cover the baby bird, and hold the service for the baby bird under the boat. And she just drove away, still crying. And so I understand how deep people's grief can be when they lose their babies, whether their babies are human babies or they're animal babies. So back to Jizo Bodhisattva then. When we invoke the wisdom and compassion of this Bodhisattva, what is awakened within our own hearts and minds is Jizo Bodhisattva. We invoke Jizo Bodhisattva so that Jizo enters our hearts and minds, and we bring this Bodhisattva into our own lives. By bringing Jizo Bodhisattva into our hearts and minds, into our consciousness, it awakens the Bodhisattva within us. Jizo-sama's courage to see and face reality becomes our courage to see and face reality, no matter how harsh or dark. Jizo Bodhisattva's capacity to deal with suffering becomes our compassion to deal with suffering. And Jizo-sama's wisdom and ability to use skillful means to benefit others becomes our own wisdom upon which we can draw. So, just as bowing to Buddha means bowing to Buddha within ourselves and others, bowing to Jizo-sama, Jizo Bodhisattva, means bowing to the Jizo Bodhisattva within ourselves and others. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas inspire us to open ourselves to what we call their immense vow power. There are vows to help living beings be liberated from suffering. Just echo throughout space and time, echo throughout the whole universe. And we can attune ourselves to this vow power. In our meditation, as we invoke the name of Jizo-sama, we attune ourselves to this vow power, and it enters our hearts. It becomes our vow. So, this is the question I leave you with. When you think of Jizo-sama, Jizo Bodhisattva, does someone you know come to your mind and heart? And I say this because, like I said, during the pandemic, I started to see the Jizo Bodhisattva and all the doctors and nurses and hospital staff, all those caring for the people, suffering from the coronavirus. But once you start placing your heart and mind on Jizo, you start to see Jizo manifesting everywhere, in people, in animals. The Bodhisattvas become alive and real to us. So I'd like to conclude my talk by reciting the 4 Bodhisattva vows. And if you know these vows by heart, you are welcome to recite them with me. These are called the 4 vows. Shiguse Ganmo. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Shujo muhen seinando. Bonno Namu Kie Butsu, Namu Kie Ho, Namu Kie So. We take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Dharma, we take refuge in the Sangha.